Welcome in, everyone. We've got breaking news on the stimulus front. Fed Chief Jerome Powell speaking this afternoon in front of that committee, interviewing right now a congressional testimony along with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. So just moments ago, this is a live look right now at the congressional hearings. And that is Maxine Waters, the chairwoman. Right now they've been grilling and actually got a little testy. It got a little testy as they're asking questions of Jerome Powell and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. This is now ended. They are now adjourned for the afternoon. But we did have some breaking news that came out of these sessions and some interesting news. First, let me couch it by saying this. Number one, this session, as Grover and I sat here and watched this today, he was really enthralled by it. But he looked up at me at one point. He said, "Hey, Clayton," he said, because that's what he calls me. He said, this seems like it's a lot of slapping people on the back about all these rich people doing really, really well. It seems like they're really glad-handing, saying, hey, you've done such a great job with this stimulus for all of these rich people. It really was. It was like watching a congressional testimony session about how well rich people are doing right now. That's really what it was. Finally, though, we did get into some questions about whether or not we would see additional stimulus for real Americans, okay, the 99%, those people who are suffering right now, those people who are unemployed, those people who do not have health insurance, those people who are expected to pay rent but don't have the money to do it, those people who, the small business owners right now who can't afford to pay their employees, therefore they're having to shut down. Again, real Americans, the 99%, not the Wall Street crowd. So how did this play out? Well, we got some breaking news from Federal Reserve Chief Jerome Powell. He was asked specifically, and I want you to watch this now. It's about 3 minutes long. Watch him dance around answering this question. He specifically asked about whether or not Congress needs to pass additional stimulus, and what was their forward guidance based on when they came out with their forecast just a few weeks ago. It was based on fiscal stimulus. Now, this congressional question is so telling because what he's asking him to answer is, how much did you plan for? You were providing a forecast based on a number of stimulus from Congress. So what he's trying to understand is, what was that number? Is it 1.5 trillion? Is it 2 trillion? Is it 1 trillion? How much additional stimulus should Congress pass, and what number was included in your forecast to show that the economy would improve based on that stimulus? That was the question. And they are back in session now after a little break.
Of that.
But I want to play now for you the sound from Fed Chief Jerome Powell answering that question just moments ago on additional stimulus. And I want you to watch his hand at the very end. Watch Jerome Powell's hand at the very end as he's fiddling with a pen, because he doesn't want to give specific numbers. But just watch this exchange. This is so telling.
Let me say that I think a big part of the good economic news that we have had results from the fiscal support that came with the CARES Act. So it deserves a lot of the credit for keeping people spending and keeping people business confidence and household confidence high. So we don't agree on a forecast. Individuals make different assumptions. I think something like most private sector forecasters are assuming that some kind of a package passes sometime in the next few months. But there isn't any particular number that I would give you that would come out of the Fed.
But is it not true, Mr. Chairman, that the Fed did itself make projections as to growth and inflation and employment? And if so, acknowledging that it assumed fiscal support, there must have been some assumption about the level of fiscal support. Actually, how else did you derive your projections?
Yeah. I wish it were that simple. The way we do it is what we publish is the individual projections of the 17 people who vote or who are participants on the FOMC, and they're free to make whatever assumptions they need. And we don't survey them on every little thing, but I would say most assumed some fiscal action. But we didn't say, we didn't create a table, and so I can't tell you exactly what was assumed, but fiscal action underlies many current forecasts.
Okay, so I want to play more of that in a second, but he's pressing him on this question. Clearly, when you 17 came up with your forward guidance that you released a few days ago, there was a number of stimulus that you planned for. And by the way, you spoke to many businesses, and Wall Street also assumes that there will be additional congressional spending for stimulus checks, money for state and local governments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. PPE, PPP, ICUP, I don't know. But all of that was in there, right? Clearly. And he said, well, I wish it was that simple. We don't really do it that way. We just kind of, come on, man, really? Yes, you just ask people for their just a basic opinion, but you don't really have any kind of an actual number that you've drilled on. I don't buy that. Do you, Joe?
Come on, man.
Exactly. I don't either. I don't think Grover does either. Do you agree with that, Grover? Do you think they don't have any numbers? They're the Federal Reserve. You don't think that they have actual numbers? Grover, I'm talking to you. What good are you, man? What good are you as a co-host? So I want to play more of this now because I think it's pretty telling. Again, watch his hand at the end as he's sort of trying to, he doesn't want to tell Congress what to do, but he kind of does. Watch this.
Well, then let me try this a different way. What happens to growth and employment if there isn't any fiscal support and it doesn't materialize?
Well, so what's happened lately is that the economy has proved resilient both to the broader spread of the disease over the summer in some of the southern western states and also to the expiration of the CARES Act benefits. So we don't really know what will happen. I would just tell you what I think the risk is. As some have pointed out, savings are very high, and that's because of a number of things. Part of it is the CARES Act, but people are still 11 million people unemployed. So the risk is that over time they go through those savings. They haven't been able to find employment yet because it's going to take a long time to get, or it's going to take a while to get 11 million people back to work. And so their spending will decline, their ability to stay in their homes will decline, and so the economy will begin to feel those negative effects at some time. At the same time, the economy is recovering, and that's a good thing. And it's very hard to have any certainty about the path forward because we don't know which of those two forces will dominate.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, unless you're arguing that fiscal stimulus has no impact, then is it not inescapable that if there is no additional fiscal support, growth will be lower?
Yes, certainly fiscal, and I've said that I think it will likely be needed. I do defer to the administration and Congress who actually have responsibility for this, but I think that it is likely that more fiscal support will be needed.
Well, what do you know? More fiscal support is needed. He was hoping there at the end that there was going to be no more questions. He was like, okay, you done with your questions? Oh, so you want to ask me about whether or not we need fiscal stimulus. Yeah, look, this is what Congress and the administration have to do. I'm just here. I'm just a lonely Federal Reserve chairman. I run the entire government. I run the United States, basically. I answer to Wall Street. When Wall Street is happy, I'm happy. When I'm happy, Wall Street's happy. I don't want to answer that question, but yes, growth will not be as high unless we have additional fiscal stimulus. So again, folks, the only way that we see additional stimulus in this country is if Wall Street suffers. It's not enough for you to suffer. It's if Wall Street suffers. So again, just pay attention to what they say and what they do. What they do is, what their focus is making sure that Wall Street's profits are secure, that bank liquidity is there, borrowing is taking place. When I listened to Jerome Powell's whole testimony, he was talking about the resiliency of these states in the West and the South to us pulling back on these CARES Act benefits, meaning they're ending. Now we're seeing, wow, it's somewhat resilient out here. He mentioned 11 million people unemployed, forgetting the fact that there are 30 million people unemployed. What he's only taking into account are those people that are still actively looking for employment. What about all of the people that have lost their jobs permanently because those jobs have all disappeared? What about the data that I showed you earlier this morning about what happens if we do not pass a stimulus when 80% of those 500,000 small businesses close permanently? Those restaurants close permanently because they're not chain restaurants. They don't have access to all of that money, that PPP money that you handed out to Ruth's Chris and Shake Shack and all those other big companies. Those big corporations that are publicly traded. Darden restaurants and other things publicly traded on the stock exchange, they're getting taken care of. So as I watch this testimony, I've been watching it for a while now.
If CECL is in fact implemented.
They're talking about, right now I'm just listening in.
Well, I share some of your concerns. We've had discussions at the FSOC over this. We've had discussions with the Fed and other regulators about delaying the impact on it, on stress testing and other things.
Right now, again, they're just talking about the banks right now. Just having a discussion about banks. All these, look at the diversity in that room, by the way. All these rich white guys. They're really concerned about you, aren't they? Really concerned. All these rich white guys just sitting there talking about fiscal policy for Wall Street. So if there's a silver lining, it's that Wall Street's profits might be hurt if we don't pass further stimulus. That's the silver lining. Because if it was just about you, we wouldn't see a stimulus. As you heard Jerome Powell mention, 11 million people unemployed. That's not the real number. So the only number they care about, the only number they're looking at, are those that are actively in the system looking for employment, not the 30 million people that are unemployed. And by the way, we've got a Supreme Court battle. So right now we have one of the big stories that we're following is, of course, the Supreme Court battle, which is going to take center stage. We're likely to see a nominee this weekend. Lindsey Graham, I can't believe this guy. Senator Lindsey Graham, who's in a tight race in South Carolina, comes out and says last night on Hannity, a favorable program for him, comes out and says, we've got the votes. We're going forward. We've got the votes to place a new Supreme Court nominee. We've got the votes, he says. Which, wait a second, you don't even know who the nominee is. We've got the votes? So basically what you're saying is you don't give a rat's behind who it is. As long as President Trump picks somebody with a pulse who's a conservative, you don't care at all about their record, their history, their character, their judicial track record. None of it you don't care about. We've got the votes. We don't care. We don't really care. As long as the person has a pulse and can wear a black robe, we're done. And we thought there might be some defections on this. There's not. There's two, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, in breaking news a few moments ago, because Mitt Romney has agreed to move forward with Trump's pick. I don't know who thought for a second that Mitt Romney wouldn't fall in line with Republicans on voting. I mean, because this is not impeachment, by the way. When he voted for Trump to be impeached, this has nothing to do with that. He's from one of the most conservative states in the country of Utah. It has nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with picking a Supreme Court justice who is going to be pro-life. That's it. It has nothing to do with Trump. With impeachment, he could say this guy is he's morally bereft, and he's corrupt president. And everyone would probably agree with him. I mean, no one, and he could go back to his constituents and say, look, I support you, but I do not support this guy in Washington. This guy is he's morally bereft. We know that. This guy's one step away from dictatorship. We get that. But this is totally different. This is Supreme Court justices, totally different. So it looks like they're moving forward with a Supreme Court vote. Nothing is going to happen on stimulus. Nothing. Probably not for another few months. We've got a Supreme Court battle, we've got a government shutdown, and we've got an election. But the good news is that Jerome Powell says we need additional stimulus. The bad news is that there are political realities at play that stand in the way of all of that happening. But, we're seeing an uptick in coronavirus cases. We're seeing a landslide of evictions coming through. We're seeing the next housing crisis unfolding, which will be people not able to pay their mortgages because they've lost their jobs. And that is how we could see a stimulus. Because once the banks have to start dealing with all of these defaults, and once corporate profits are going to decline because consumer spending is not there, that's when Congress will likely step in. When they start hearing from their Wall Street donors, you better pass a stimulus, you better pass a stimulus, because my bottom line is being affected. When you start hearing from the airline owners, when you start hearing from Boeing, I donated a couple $100,000 to your campaign, Mitch McConnell. I'm Boeing. I donated millions to you over the years. You better call for another stimulus. You better bring this to the floor. You better get some of your senators on board. All of those guys who said they didn't want additional stimulus, I've donated millions to you guys. That's how this happens. And that's how we will see another stimulus. It's not about you and how you're hurting. It's how Wall Street gets hurt. Then we'll see another stimulus, and then they can play good guy. We're helping you, the worker. It's not how it happens. I wish I had better news tonight, but I have breaking news. I have actual news. I have Fed Chief Jerome Powell actually saying, and I'll play the very end of it again just so we have it on the record. Here's what, after not wanting to answer this for 3 minutes, he finally answers this question on new additional stimulus during this congressional testimony.
Has no impact. Then is it not inescapable that if there is no additional fiscal support, growth will be lower?
Yes, certainly fiscal, and I've said that I think it will likely be needed. I do defer to the administration and Congress, who actually have responsibility for this, but I think that it is likely that more fiscal support will be needed.
There you go. So there you go. There is no stimulus vote happening this week. There is nothing on the congressional calendar for a vote. Nothing has even been agreed upon that will even go through committee. Things need to go through committee first before they get put to the larger vote on the floor of the House. Things do not come out of committee that aren't ready to be voted on. There's nothing. There is nothing on the calendar going to happen. None of this problem solvers caucus. I talked to one of my sources today who said, no, there's no problem solver. No, there's all political posturing. It's an election. Yeah, I know there are 50 members doing their problem solving, but nothing is going to come of it. I just saw somebody in the chat saying, yeah, there's another YouTuber thinks there's going to be a stimulus that was going to pass this week. Okay, let's listen to YouTubers who aren't journalists. Let's start doing that and see how we can get our hopes up on garbage. If something breaks, and there's news that actually happens on the stimulus front, that suddenly they manage to write an entire bill, agree on it in committee behind closed doors, then have it come to the floor of the House of Representatives in the next 48 hours and have a vote in the midst of a Supreme Court battle and a government shutdown and an election, I will eat my son's protractor because I'm watching my figure. Get it? So that's that. Thank you guys so much for dialing us up today and catching us on this breaking news. Please don't forget, we'll have full coverage on our newsletter. It's totally free. You got to subscribe. Come on. All the cool kids are doing it. Just go to morninginvest.com, smash that like button, subscribe to our free newsletter. It's delivered right to your inbox every morning. We give away a ton of free stuff in there too. We're giving away some mugs this week. We give some hoodies away to some nice winners last week, some brand new eco-conscious hoodies. So check those out. Thank you so much for your support of the channel. And I'm going to go back to watching some boring stuff, so you don't have to.
These are not loopholes exploited by American businesses, but serve as a way to reduce.
Yeah, do you want to watch that? Don't do it. It'll just cause you stomach pain. I'll do it for you, and I'll report back. Much love to all of you. We'll see you bright and early, 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow, where we do this show live every day Every day we do this show live at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, so turn on that bell notification and subscribe. We'll see you next time, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Good night.